Hey guys, my name is John Chihak, and welcome to the video hardcore review, where I will be looking back at various comic book projects, movie projects, music, and things that I've reviewed in the past. I used to write a blog and a blog entry for Comic Book Therapy, but I decided to do something new because I have a couple of Patreon pages, and I'm really trying to get some notice behind them and do something a little bit different. Now, mostly what I do is I write and draw comic books. I do a project called Euthanasia, which is ongoing. I created and illustrated a book called Fuzzy Face, which is probably the most well-received project I have done. That was written by my friend Venus of Necro several years ago and came out in 2010. Now, the most recent project that I've started on is an all-ages tale called The Bubba Patrol. It is a story about my dogs as superheroes and features Agnew J. Pennyworth, who is in both Euthanasia and Fuzzy Face, but in a very all-ages friendly type scenario. Now, I know you might think, like, all ages, it's for kids, but what I mean by all ages is there are jokes in there that kids will laugh at, but they won't know why they're funny. There's no bad language, there's no drug use, there's no sex. The violence is really cartoony, and the dialogue is a lot of fun to write because the first issue is kind of like a buddy cop movie, with Agnew and Sabu going to rescue Guri and Foley from a warehouse several blocks away from their apartment. Comedy ensues, a lot of fun things happen. We ran a really successful Kickstarter for it this past year in 2017. But what I wanted to do now is I wanted to show you or do almost like a newscast video review of one of my favorite stories of all time that I hadn't read in a really long time and sadly forgot about until recently when I picked it up at a used graphic novel sale. 2000's Marvel Knight, the year 2000, Marvel Knight's Welcome Back, Frank. Written by Garth Ennis, penciled by Steve Dillon, and inked by Jimmy Palmiotti. This story followed the not so critically acclaimed, not so well-received 1998 Marvel Knights launch when the Punisher came back as like an avenging angel, complete with supernatural weaponry and things like that. This kind of cleansed our palates and brought us back to the roots of what made the Punisher such a beloved character, but also just such a visceral character. The kills were very, very, shall we say, innovative, not unlike Tommy Dreamer in his ECW days, where he was finding new and inventive ways to take out his adversaries and harm himself in some strange way. Like chucking one of Maganucci's sons off the Empire State Building, like the very tip top where the needle was. Death by polar bear in the Central Park Zoo. And just before that, the Punisher shot and wounded running through the zoo, climbs into the polar bear pit. The polar bears are sleeping, and they're very docile. So what does he do to amp them up so that they'll attack the Magnucci clan running through the zoo after him? He punches them in the face. You know, like, stuff like that is reserved for comic books and movies and cartoons only. But it results in a one-swipe paw beheading of the one of the aforementioned hitmen coming after the Punisher, and it also results in the main antagonist, Magnucci, being dismembered of 4 of her limbs. So she's a quad amputee. I don't know if that's the correct term or not, medically speaking. And a great scene where she's ordering one of her henchmen and then another to take out the guy previously, and then the third to take out the 2 previously, and then the fourth to take out the 3 previously, who finally just says, fine, I'll do it, and guns them all down. And then the introduction of one of the craziest Punisher adversaries of all time. Now, Punisher usually deals with mafioso types and, you know, occasionally Yakuza. And then in some of the newer stuff, he's dealt with human traffickers and coyotes in the Southwest. But Mognucci reaches out to a mountain of a man named the Russian, who just basically, there's no real background on him other than he's just this gigantic guy who loves chaos and violence and pretty much leaves death and destruction wherever he goes. So this guy shows up to Frank Castle's abode, which is a rundown, ramshackle apartment complex where his neighbors are Joan the Mouse, who is a very small, timid, shy woman who's too afraid to leave the city just because she's scared of what change may bring. A lot of us have that same fear, and we don't deal well with change. Spacker Dave, who is a pierced, tattooed punk rocker who, you know, just likes the Punisher so much that when he finds out who he is, has all of his piercings torn out with needle nose pliers and doesn't reveal that the man named the Punisher is only 2 doors down from him. And then the third neighbor, Mr. Bumpo, who is a very large, obese man who is a shut-in and used for, I guess, effective comic relief in a lot of senses. When the Russian shows up, Frank Castle barely escapes with his life, and hits the Russian in the face with a steaming hot pizza pie that Mr. Bumpo has, and then knocking the Russian down, throws Mr. Bumpo, who probably weighs about 550 pounds, on top of the Russian and his head and chest, and then jumps on top of Mr. Bumpo. And it goes from one panel to the next, and it says, "Mr. Bumpo, how long has it been?" And he goes, about 20 minutes, Mr. Smith. And Frank looks at him and he goes, "Okay, we give it another 10. And he goes, "Whatever you say, Mr. Smith." And then the next scene, Frank showing up at the Mognucci compound with the Russian's severed head and, you know, shows it to her. It's great in its glorified cartoon comedic violence and really brings Garth Ennis's work to the forefront. Now, he had been writing Preacher and some other stuff for DC like Hitman for several years, and it had all been good. But The Punisher, I think, was really the first thing that he did for Marvel, and it was also the really first really mainstream thing he's done. Ennis doesn't like caped superheroes, as you might notice from his Punisher runs, from Preacher, very non-traditional superhero type stories, and then Hitman, also not a traditional superhero. You run afoul of some of the other characters like the Six Pack and stuff like that, but they're more Tick-like superheroes. I mean, they don't really have powers, and they're just kind of goofy offshoots and parodies of what, you know, exists within the superhero universe and mythos. But Ennis starts a really good foundation for himself with Welcome Back, Frank. He also wrote the subsequent ongoing Marvel Knights Punisher series, and then got Marvel to do something that you never thought they would do in a million years, do a hard R comic book series called Punisher Max, which is now available in collected editions. There are 6 collected editions. Actually, Ennis's, now that I think about it, his first foray into the Marvel Universe and the Punisher itself was Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, where Frank Castle kills everybody in the Marvel Universe, and then at the very, very end kills himself, which then, of course, spawned, you know, all the copycats with Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe and stuff like that. But Welcome Back, Frank, I would say, goes into my top 3, behind All-Star Superman, which was also done by a great creative team in Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. And then my number 1, which has been my number 1 for several years now, called Teenagers from Mars, a little-known indie comic book from AIT Planet Lar. I believe you can still order graphic novels of it. I have all 9 issues and several copies of the collected edition just because I love the story so much. And that was written by Rick Spears and drawn by Rob G. And they've put together a pretty good list of stories together as a solid creative team, like Dead West, Filler, Repo, which may or may not have been the impetus for the Repo movie with Forrest Whitaker in it, where they repossessed the harvested organs and transplanted organs of people who could not keep up on payments. But I'm going to be back with more review videos and hope you enjoy watching them. I will talk to you later. This has been John Chihak.